Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. The story of Transformers is one we have seen told time and again. On a distant planet, a civil war between the noble Autobots and the villainous Decepticons has left their planet of Cybertron in ruin and uninhabitable, forcing both factions to abandon their dead planet, where they find themselves landing on Earth. From there, their war continues, with the battle for Earth being reimagined with over dozens of iterations of the characters and the Autobots' battle to protect the Earth from the Decepticons. But for the most part, we're almost always exclusively shown the Transformers after they had arrived on Earth, only ever being given glimpses of the battle on Cybertron, either through brief flashbacks or maybe a short scene of the Transformers leaving their planet at the start of a given story. That was, however, until someone's mind expanded and unlocked the secrets of the universe, giving them the brilliant idea to work with High Moon Studios to create a video game entirely taking place during the war on Cybertron, a dream come true for Transformers fans. Thus, Transformers War for Cybertron was created. Was it a shiny new interpretation of Transformers or a pile of scrap? Transform, roll out, and let's turn the page to Transformers War for Cybertron for the Xbox 360 and Nintendo DS. The console version of Transformers War for Cybertron is a third-person shooter, where the player gets to play one of two campaigns, one for the Autobots and one for the Decepticons, each containing 4 main levels and a final boss fight. These two campaigns are actually both part of one singular story, with the Decepticons consisting of the first half of the campaign, with the Autobot story containing the second half. Despite this, you can play through either campaign first, which I found a little strange. If you chose to play the Autobot campaign first, it entirely spoils the events of the Decepticon campaign, so why would I want to do that? Personally, I just played through the game chronologically. The game throws the player right into the ongoing civil war, with the Decepticon campaign having Megatron acquire a powerful yet unstable energy source called Dark Energon, and using it to devastate the Autobot army as he seeks to use the Dark Energon to corrupt the very core of Cybertron. Meanwhile, the Autobot campaign has Optimus, not yet a Prime, and his team of Autobots attempting to push back against the overwhelming power of the Decepticons and save what's left of their home. War for Cybertron's story is solid. Getting to see the war we've always heard about but barely experienced before is a novelty in and of itself. It's certainly one of the darker Transformers stories, with torture and death being commonplace throughout the game's 8 to 10 hour runtime. Thankfully, the game never felt too dark, keeping a bit of that campy dialogue that gave Transformers its initial charm all the way back in the original cartoon.
That cell up ahead.
I was wondering when you guys were gonna show up.
We took the extended tour, saw the sights, blasted some bad guys, the usual.
There's a lot of fun dialogue between the Autobots and Decepticons, and I like that you can see the clear difference between the two factions just by how they interact with each other. The Autobots are friendly but competitive with each other, while the Decepticons are much more antagonistic, with their constant bickering and backbiting.
Warpath! Slow down! What's wrong, Ironhide? Too rusty to keep up? Did you see that?
You mean that creepy-looking thing that just jumped over the side?
Yeah.
Nope, I didn't see anything.
I should have left you two on the station.
On the topic of character interactions, the voice acting in War for Cybertron is stellar, having an all-star cast of some of the best actors in the industry. As always, Peter Cullen returns as Optimus, and proves why he remains the voice of the Autobot leader, and thankfully returns to a personality that shows a more caring and compassionate leader, rather than the murderous psychopath we got in the Michael Bay films.
You're a skilled fighter, but you shouldn't be out here alone. Autobots are no longer safe in Iacon. He's going to die.
I'll kill you!
Give me your faith.
Unfortunately, Frank Welker was not brought in to reprise his role as Megatron, which is a shame. That's not to downplay Fred Tatascore's acting as Megatron, as he gives a tremendously powerful performance and demands the player's attention whenever he speaks.
I am the Dominator. I am the Destroyer. I am Megatron! Decepticons, receive your birthright.
I'd also like to give a shout out to Sam Riegel as Starscream, who gives a near perfect balance of slimy schemer and coward.
It's too unstable, Megatron. Using that power, you're endangering our entire world!
Teach me, Megatron. Teach me to wield Dark Energon the way you do, and I will serve you.
And what could you possibly offer me that I cannot simply take?
The supply of Dark Energon aboard this station is nearly exhausted. I know how to manufacture more.
Regardless of which character you look at, the voice actor provides an excellent show. No one here is bad or even mediocre. This is an A+ cast across the board. I was a little disappointed that the game starts after the war has already begun, as I would have loved to have seen the initial sparks of conflict that led to the war. I understand why they decided to forego this. After all, it is a video game, not a movie, so they want the player to actually, play. But I wish we at least got to see some key events, like how Megatron formed the Decepticons. Megatron in this game is just such an asshole to everyone, including his own troops, to the point where it's honestly baffling he has any followers at all.
Reroute all power to forward guns and thrusters! Full speed ahead!
But sir, that's suicide!
Any further objections?
This could have been remedied by maybe having some text or audio logs scattered around the level that detail some earlier events, but unfortunately nothing of the sort is here. That's not to say there aren't any cool events in this game, because there absolutely are. Seeing Optimus before he gains the title of Prime, or witnessing Starscream as an Autobot before defecting is fantastic, and are the kind of moments you can only get during the battle on Cybertron. In a given level, you have the option of selecting one of 3 characters to play. Each character in the game is one of 4 classes: Leader, Soldier, Scientist, and Scout. Each class provides small differences in the character's movement speed, their primary weapon, and a unique ability usable by pressing the left bumper, such as a quick dash or temporarily turning invisible. Otherwise, each character plays identically, being able to hold 2 different weapons, having a strong melee attack, and most importantly, being able to transform into a vehicle on the fly. You have the usual suspects when it comes to weapon types to scrap the metal off the opposing force. Machine guns, snipers, grenade launchers, shotguns. If you've played a shooter before, you know what you're getting. There's no crazy unique Cybertronian weapons to choose from, but what's provided here gets the job done. The enemies being made out of metal gives a satisfying crunch whenever you defeat an opponent, making shooting even the most basic of foes feel good. Of course, the real thrill is being able to freely switch between robot and vehicle form, adding a particular spice to combat by giving you additional mobility on the battlefield. It was especially thrilling when playing as the likes of Starscream or Jetfire, shooting foes on the ground before blasting into the skies at intense speed. I do feel like the game could have benefited from some sort of cover system. At numerous points, there are instances where you need to face off against large waves of enemies that greatly outnumber you. Even on the easier difficulties, I found enemies shred through your health a little too quickly, and without a dedicated cover system, there were plenty of moments where I thought I was out of the line of fire just to be shot down, leading to a fair few game overs which left me a touch frustrated. There are also a few bits where the difficulty spiked much higher than I felt it should, the chief example being the part where you need to defend Ratchet in the Autobot campaign. The number of enemies thrown at you while trying to protect Ratchet was just absurd. Overall, the shooting mechanics in War for Cybertron are good. Aside from the transforming, there's not a whole lot in terms of combat that you likely haven't seen in other third-person shooters, but considering Transformers' remarkably poor track record in the world of video games prior, War for Cybertron was certainly a massive step up in quality. I did notice a bit of difference in quality between the Autobot and Decepticon campaigns, with the Autobot levels feeling like they got far more love between the two. With the amount of shooting in War for Cybertron, it can get a little repetitive after a while. In the Autobot campaign, I felt as though there were many more little moments that spice up the gameplay, like when you lose your weapons in a Decepticon prison,
You can't keep me in here, Megatron!
racing along a crumbling road, or a turret section while traveling to the core of Cybertron. These brief changes to the gameplay kept the experience fresh, and saved off the repetitiveness of endless shooting galleries. The Decepticon campaign did also have moments like this. Flying through the air Starscream at top speed was a particular highlight, but I found there were fewer and farther between. This led to me getting burned out of the Decepticon campaign much faster, while the Autobot campaign had a better pace, which was far more engaging. And continuing the difference in quality between the two campaigns, I found the Autobots had a much wider selection of characters rotated between each level. When one level would have Bumblebee and Ratchet, the next would have Ironhide and Warpath. The Decepticons on the other hand had much less variety, with levels 3 to the final boss only allowing you to select between the same trio of Megatron, Soundwave, and Breakdown. This isn't a huge deal, but it is just one of those little things that made me feel the Autobot campaign had more care put into it, but maybe I'm overthinking it. A clear weakness of War for Cybertron is its visuals. Plenty of textures look muddy up close, and the environments are almost entirely grey, making all the areas you visit bleed together. Nothing about Cybertron leaves all that much of an impression. I suppose the reason why the colors in War for Cybertron are so muted and unsaturated is that they want the tone to feel much more serious. We are in the middle of a war after all, so it does make sense to stray away from Transformers' more colourful roots. I'm sure this grittier look has its fans, but I personally didn't much care for it. I much prefer the visual style of the game's sequel, Fall of Cybertron. The color choice of War for Cybertron leaves the world and characters looking bland and unremarkable. I'm personally not a fan of it. Though I do want to praise the decision to implement neon Tron lines into each character's design, giving each Autobot red lines and Decepticons purple. Since each character otherwise uses an identically dull color palette, the neon lights prevent the characters from blending into the background, and it helps the player tell who's friend or foe with just a split-second glance. This was a fantastic idea that would have really hampered the overall experience if it wasn't there. The campaigns of War for Cybertron last about 8 to 10 hours, and unfortunately, once you finish the campaign, that's really all that's left nowadays. War for Cybertron originally came with online multiplayer and a mode called Escalation, a horde mode where you and a team of up to 4 players try to survive as many waves of enemies as you can. However, the servers for War for Cybertron shut down in 2020, leaving both these modes now permanently unplayable, and only the campaign for players to sink their teeth into. You can't even play the campaigns in multiplayer anymore, as there was no split screen, and the co-op was only available online. This unfortunately significantly lowers the overall content value of the game. As mentioned previously, there are no text logs, audio logs, or any other extras hidden in the single player, leaving very little incentive to replay the story outside of trying on a harder difficulty or playing as one of the other characters. At the time of this recording, used copies of War for Cybertron range from around $30 to $50, which can be a hard sell due to how little there is to do without the multiplayer servers. All that said, if you're a Transformers fan and you can find War for Cybertron at a good price, there's still a perfectly solid third-person shooter awaiting you. War for Cybertron isn't particularly revolutionary, nor a must-play shooter, but what's here is perfectly competent, and the novelty of getting to play through the Transformers war before heading to Earth is certainly a strong novelty. Most importantly, it also marked a shift in quality for Transformers games for the better, so while it's not amazing in isolation, War for Cybertron is nevertheless an important game. War for Cybertron didn't just come out on consoles though, as it also had a handheld release, 2 in fact. So let's now turn our attention to the DS versions of War for Cybertron. Starting with the video game adaptation of the first Michael Bay Transformers film, Transformers games on DS had gone the way of Pokemon, releasing with 2 versions, one where you play as the Autobots and others as Decepticons. So when Vicarious Visions decided to bring War for Cybertron to DS, it wasn't surprising to see them do the same thing. The key difference here is that the games based on the movies gave a completely original story depending on which version you bought. If you bought the Decepticon version of Transformers 1, you'll have a full campaign where you crush the Autobots and revive Megatron to take over the world. However, the DS versions of War for Cybertron uses the same story as the console version, only now split up between 2 versions. If you buy the Decepticon version, you only get the first half of the story, while if you buy the Autobots, you only get the second half. This means you'll need to buy the game twice to get the full War for Cybertron story, which is just gross. Whereas the movie games gave unique experiences, the 2-version idea here feels more like a cash grab. There's very little reason to split up the titles like this, and knowing you're getting an incomplete version of the game compared to its console counterpart leaves a bad taste in my mouth. Personally, I only bought the Decepticon version, as I've always been more drawn to villains than heroes. Anyways, moving into gameplay, whereas the console versions were third-person shooters, the DS version is better referred to as a third-person action game. While each character does have a firearm at their disposal, the game places equal importance on close-quarters combat, with you being able to freely switch between close and long-range weapons on the fly for any given situation. Before going into a level, you can select two characters, which you can freely switch between by pressing the A button. Losing a character will automatically switch you over to your reserve, allowing you to revive your partner by defeating a certain amount of enemies. Each character falls under one of three classes: Light, Air, and Heavy. These classes affect the character's movement speed, health, weapon specialty, and vehicle form. The likes of Megatron has a large amount of health and a powerful melee attack, but he's slow and his long-range weapon isn't much faster. Meanwhile, Starscream has an outrageously strong firearm and has the ability to fly, but he's also incredibly squishy, only taking a few hits before going down. While selecting your characters, you'll want to pay attention to your character's weapon types. Each character has two weapons: a firearm, which will slowly use up energy that will need to recharge, and a melee weapon, which doesn't use energy but naturally requires you to get in close with an enemy to actually use. Each weapon has a particular strength, represented by the color red, yellow, or blue. The game classifies these colors as plasma, laser, and solid, but I'll be damned if I can actually remember which corresponds to what color, so I'll continue to refer to them as red, yellow, and blue. Each enemy will have a color next to their health bar, and attacking them with a weapon of the same color will do drastically increased damage. You'll want to make sure both characters are able to cover all three weapon types. Selecting two characters who only have yellow and blue weapons will make fighting red enemies an utter slog. If you tap the touchscreen, you can transform into vehicle form, where your weapons deal all three weapon types but consumes energy much faster. The combat is pretty solid. The inherent strengths and weaknesses of each playable character, alongside their various combination of weapons, did an excellent job of making everyone feel distinct from one another, and actually had me stop and think about who I thought would be the optimal combination of characters for a given level. The color system also meant I needed to constantly switch between my two characters, while forcing me to decide if I thought it would be best to keep at a distance or rush in and fight bot to bot. The fact that the game has a lock-on system was much appreciated, keeping me focused on an enemy even as I walked around trying to avoid getting hit. I did find that the constant strafing during the lock-on quickly became uncomfortable with the D-pad, and my thumb would get cramped after just a short play session. It wasn't unbearable, but also never really comfortable, making this a game better served for short moments of pick up and play, not long sessions. Each level is you alternating between combat sections and platforming sections. The platforming was fine, but being able to skip over these sections with an air character's flight did make these moments a bit of a joke. What I did really appreciate is that each level has a handful of these gold tokens hidden behind shortcuts that can only be accessed by particular vehicle types. These tokens come in one of two flavors. The first are data discs, which can be applied before starting a level. These data discs offer various stat boosts for your pairing for the duration of a level. These allow you to increase stats where your pairing may be lacking, or make their strengths all the more powerful. The second bonus tokens provide additional unlockable characters. The handheld versions actually have a larger roster of playable characters than their console counterparts, and unlike the console versions where you're only ever allowed to play as one of three characters in a given stage, once you unlock a character in the DS version, you can select them in any level, which is pretty awesome. Having these golden tokens does a great job of encouraging players to explore and replay levels. The DS versions aren't particularly long, you can beat the campaign in 2 to 3 hours, so the increased encouragement to go back to prior levels with the incentive of getting a new playable character to mess around with was definitely the right call. The fully 3D levels are impressive for a DS game. Each of the characters have admirably detailed models, and in a world where I found the DS to veer more towards sprite work than 3D models, I must commend the effort on display here. Unfortunately, the team at Activision may have been pushing the limits a bit too much, as there is a noticeable amount of slowdown at various points, especially when enemies appear on screen. It didn't bother me too much, but it was a bit distracting. Additionally, War for Cybertron DS still suffers from a poor color scheme as its console brother, with environments and characters having similarly dull color palettes, which makes it uninteresting to look at. This is Cybertron! The sky is the limit when it comes to creating interesting technological architecture, but as it stands, both versions are fairly bland. The game does have various modes outside of the campaign. It has multiplayer, allowing you to play in a variety of modes against a friend, as well as bonus and arena. Arenas are just bite-sized missions taking place in small, arenas. They're short and don't leave much of a lasting impression individually, but it's more bang for your buck, and completing certain levels nets you even more playable characters. By the time you finish the main story, you'll have unlocked 4 levels in the bonus section. What are these bonus levels, you may ask? Why, they're the first 4 levels of the opposite version. So if you bought Decepticons like I did, you'll get the first 4 levels from the Autobot version. This is simultaneously clever and devious. Obviously by doing this, the hope is you'll get invested and more willing to shell out the extra money for the second version. At the same time, it's hard to get too upset at this. At the end of the day, it's more levels, and it also means you get a decent portion of the Autobot roster to play as well. More content is more content, and while it's not the full experience it should have been, it admittedly softens the blow somewhat. So there's quite a lot to like about War for Cybertron on the DS, but I can't deny it had a fair amount of issues that brought down the game for me. First, the game made a slightly baffling decision to include an experience system into the game. As you defeat enemies and find energon cubes throughout the level, your character will gain experience and level up, with a max level of 20. As you level up, you'll be able to distribute points to boost the character's various stats. The system was unnecessary and felt out of place in an action game like this. It also discourages using the vast selection of characters provided, since rotating the roster can mean being under-leveled for a particular stage, making for a frustrating playthrough. Some of the later levels in this game are hard, and you'll want every advantage you can get, ultimately encouraging you to pick 2 characters and stick with them for the entirety of the playthrough, unless you feel like replaying previous stages over and over again to grind your other characters. No thanks. Next is the checkpoint system. It's bad. In each level, there are typically only 2 or 3 checkpoints you'll go back to if you get a game over. And as I mentioned previously, the game can be challenging in later levels, and losing both characters will mean constantly needing to replay the same long stretches of level over and over again ad nauseum. Worse yet, falling into a bottomless pit is an instant game over, regardless if you have another character on standby. Make a jump and just narrowly miss a platform? Too bad, back to the beginning with you. At least your experience points don't reset so you can still level up your characters as you restart a stage. It's a small comfort though. Finally, and this one's more of a nitpick honestly, I wish the ability to transform into vehicle mode wasn't located on the touchscreen. Outside of transforming, everything else in the game is relegated to a button, so my hand would always be at either side of the DS. If I ever needed to transform, I would need to take my hand off to tap the stylus. It's a minor issue, but it doesn't make transforming feel as snappy, and there were instances where I need to transform in a hurry. The right bumper is completely unused, and could have easily had the transform ability mapped to it. As I said, a minor issue in the long run, but it never felt as comfortable as it could have been. Both the console versions of War for Cybertron offer a perfectly solid experience, each with their own clear strengths and weaknesses. If you have both a 360 or a PS3 and a Nintendo DS, but only want to get one version, I'd give the edge to the console version. While the DS version's additional playable characters, extra content, and blend of range and close quarters combat make it plenty fun, I can't deny it still feels like I only received half a game, with a multitude of bizarre exclusions and frustrations which hold it back from the same level as its console brethren. And so, War for Cybertron on the Nintendo DS will claim the number 23 spot, just above Octopath Traveler. Meanwhile, the 360 version will fly a bit higher, seizing the number 20 spot under Ultimate Ninja Storm. And that will do it for War for Cybertron. In our next video, we'll be returning to the world of Shinobi with the Naruto series. Will it be one of the good ones or the bad ones? You'll just have to wait and see. In the meanwhile, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. May we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.